No maid lasted with the billionaire's new wife, until a new black maid did the impossible. The bucket of dirty water, a murky, swirling vortex of grey, tipped and spread across the pristine Italian marble floor like a malevolent tide. Victoria Richards, the second wife of the oil tycoon William Richards, watched from the sweeping curve of the grand staircase, her porcelain teacup held aloft like a scepter. She was a vision of bored, calculated cruelty. "That's the third time this week someone has managed to get in my way," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr that was more dangerous than any shout. She descended the steps, her movements a study in the casual, unthinking elegance of a person born to humiliate. "I am simply not in the mood for this level of incompetence." Diana Santos, a 42-year-old woman whose face was etched with the quiet, weary resilience of a long and difficult life, said nothing. She knelt, her soaked slippers making a soft, squelching sound against the flooded marble, and began to mop up the mess Victoria had so deliberately, so casually, created. In the hushed, cavernous hallway, the other members of the domestic staff exchanged knowing, pitying glances. Another one, their eyes seemed to say. She won't last the week. But they didn't know Diana. They couldn't possibly know that at 42, Diana had buried her pride, her dignity, her sense of self, in a shallow, unmarked grave the day her 9-year-old daughter had been diagnosed with a rare and life-threatening heart condition. The hospital bills, a silent, relentless avalanche of numbers, had piled up, burying her old life, her old self, under their crushing weight. Diana wasn't here to make friends. She wasn't here to defend her honor. She was here for one reason, and one reason only: to survive. The Richards mansion, a sprawling, opulent monstrosity perched on the cliffs of Bishop's Drive, was known for two things: its breathtaking, panoramic views of the bay, and its impossibly, almost comically, high rate of employee turnover. In the 6 short months since Victoria had become the new Mrs. Richards, 9 maids had come and gone through the same imposing black lacquered front door. Some had left in tears, some in a state of stunned, silent shock. One, in her haste to escape, had even left her shoes behind. Victoria, at 33, was a full 25 years younger than her new husband. She had skin like polished alabaster, eyes the color of a winter sky, and a tongue as sharp and as cruel as a shard of broken glass. The older, more established members of the staff whispered that she wielded her cruelty with a particular, almost desperate, ferocity, as if she needed to constantly, and publicly, prove that she deserved her place in this gilded cage. "Do you understand the English language?" Victoria asked, her voice a condescending drawl as she watched Diana wring out the mop. "Because when I speak, I expect a response." "Yes, ma'am," Diana replied, her own voice a quiet, neutral murmur. She kept her eyes down, her focus on the task at hand. "Good, because disorganized, incompetent people make me nervous," Victoria said, leaving the sentence hanging in the air, a veiled and very deliberate threat. Diana nodded, her movements economical, efficient. But as she worked, her eyes, sharp and observant, caught something that Victoria, in her towering arrogance, had completely overlooked: a small, discreet security camera, tucked away in the ornate plasterwork of the ceiling. Its tiny red light, a silent, unblinking witness to this small, private act of gratuitous humiliation. Victoria, satisfied with her latest display of petty power, turned and ascended the stairs, her silk dressing gown trailing behind her like the train of a malevolent queen. She was utterly, blissfully, unaware that she was dealing with someone completely and fundamentally different from the 9 maids who had come before her. Diana Santos was not just another desperate, downtrodden victim. She was a woman who had learned, in the crucible of unimaginable pain, how to turn her suffering into a strategy. And as she dried her hands on her apron, a slow, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was the smile of a predator who has just watched its prey, fat and complacent and utterly oblivious, walk directly into a carefully and patiently laid trap. Diana's first days in the Richards mansion unfolded with the cruel, predictable rhythm of a medieval torture device. Victoria, it seemed, had a particular talent for a kind of psychological warfare that was as creative as it was so. She would awaken at precisely 9 a.m., her voice, a high, imperious summons, echoing through the silent halls. She demanded her coffee be served at exactly 72 degrees Celsius, not hotter, not colder. On the first day, when Diana, using a digital thermometer, achieved the perfect temperature, Victoria complained that the sugar had not been properly dissolved. The next day, when the sugar was perfect, she declared that the cup had a smudge on it. The day after that, when the cup was flawless, she announced, with a theatrical sigh, that the coffee had, in the time it had taken to achieve perfection, gone cold. "Are you hard of hearing?" she asked on the fourth morning, her voice a sharp, impatient crack in the quiet of the breakfast room. She deliberately, with a small, almost imperceptible flick of her wrist, spilled a stream of the perfectly prepared coffee onto the priceless, cream-colored Persian rug, because I could have sworn that I explained to you, in very simple terms, exactly how I prefer my morning coffee. Diana knelt, her movements calm, unhurried, and began to blot the stain. As she worked, she watched, from under her lowered lashes, as Victoria pulled out her phone and posted a perfectly framed selfie to her Instagram account. The caption read, "Some days, you just have to teach people how to do things right. Hashtag Madam Live, hashtag high standards, hashtag the struggle is real." The post garnered 15,000 likes in the first 20 minutes. What Victoria, in her narcissistic bubble, could not possibly know was that Diana Santos had, for 12 long and successful years, been the administrative manager of a busy metropolitan hospital. She had managed a staff of over 100 people. She had juggled multi-million-dollar budgets. She had dealt, on a daily basis, with the fragile, overinflated egos of some of the city's most brilliant and most arrogant surgeons. She knew women like Victoria intimately. She had dealt with their passive-aggressive demands, their thinly veiled contempt, their casual, unthinking cruelty. The only difference was that now she had to swallow the humiliation. She had to absorb the insults. She had to endure the endless petty mind games, because her daughter, her sweet, brave Emma, was on the waiting list for a second, and even more complex, heart surgery, and Emma's survival depended, entirely, on the $3,000-$5,100-a-month paycheck that this woman, this monster in silk and diamonds, signed. "My last maid," Victoria said one afternoon, her voice a casual, conversational purr as she watched Diana meticulously fold a mountain of expensive cashmere sweaters. "She lasted exactly 4 days. Do you know why?" Diana said nothing, because she thought she could be clever with me. She quickly discovered that I do not tolerate insubordination. Victoria opened her laptop and turned the screen towards Diana. It was a private Facebook group, a page called the Elite Ladies Network. Victoria had written a post. "Does anyone have a recommendation for a new maid? The last one I hired was completely incompetent. I had to let her go. These people simply do not understand that quality comes at a price." Below the post, there were 143 supportive, commiserating comments from the other madams of their exclusive social circle, all sharing similar, and equally demeaning, stories about the difficulty of finding good help these days. Diana read it all, her face a mask of polite, professional neutrality. But her mind, her sharp, analytical mind, was cataloging every detail. Victoria didn't just humiliate her employees in private, she publicly, and gleefully, sacrificed their reputations to her wealthy friends, for sport. "You can read, can't you?" Victoria laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Or shall I translate it for you?" "I understand perfectly, ma'am," Diana replied, her voice a low, even murmur. She continued to fold the sweaters, her movements precise, almost military in their efficiency. The following week, the psychological games escalated. Victoria hid the vacuum cleaner and then later that day berated Diana for failing to properly clean the carpets. She changed the Wi-Fi password and then accused Diana of stealing the internet when she saw her trying to check for messages from Emma's doctors during her designated lunch break. But the worst, the most profoundly and personally cruel, came on Friday. Diana was in William's vast oak-paneled office, dusting the shelves, when she found an open folder on his desk. It contained a series of documents related to his charitable donations, and at the very top of the pile was a letter of thanks from the Children's Heart Foundation, the very same organization that had, through a grant, helped to cover a portion of the costs of Emma's first surgery. At that precise moment, Victoria swept into the room. She saw Diana looking at the papers, and her eyes narrowed. "Curious, are we?" she said, her voice a low, menacing purr. She strode to the desk and snapped the folder shut. "My husband loves to play the philanthropist. He donates thousands of dollars to these useless charities, organizations that do nothing but encourage a culture of dependency in people who should be perfectly capable of solving their own problems." Diana felt the blood drain from her face, but she held her expression, a mask of calm, respectful neutrality. "You know what I always tell him," Victoria continued, a cruel, amused glint in her eyes. Charity begins at home. Why waste all that money on a bunch of strangers when we could be renovating the beach house in the Hamptons? That night, in the small, Spartan room that was allotted to the live-in maid, Diana called her daughter. Emma's voice, though weak, was filled with an excited energy as she told her mother about the new book she was reading at school. "Mummy, when are you coming home?" she asked, her small voice thick with a longing that was a physical pain in Diana's chest. "Soon, sweetheart, very soon. Mummy just has to work a little bit longer to make sure you stay strong and healthy." After she hung up the phone, Diana opened a small leather-bound notebook. In a neat, precise script, she began to write. She documented every one of Victoria's cruelties, every humiliation, every veiled threat. She noted the date, the time, the context. She took screenshots of every single one of Victoria's malicious social media posts and saved them to a secure, cloud-based server. Diana Santos was no longer just a desperate mother trying to survive. She was a woman who had learned, in the crucible of her own quiet, personal hell, how to turn every blow, every insult, every act of gratuitous cruelty into fuel. And as Victoria slept soundly in her silken satin bed, cocooned in her own smug, self-satisfied superiority, Diana sat in the darkness, and she planned. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is not being submissive. She is gathering ammunition, and when you foolishly, and fatally, underestimate a person who has everything to lose, and therefore, nothing to fear, you are about to discover that patience, when honed to a razor's edge, can be the most lethal weapon of all. Diana's second week in the Richards mansion began with a new and even more public form of cruelty. During breakfast, as Diana was serving her perfectly prepared 72-degree coffee, Victoria filmed a short video for her TikTok account. It showed Diana, on her hands and knees, cleaning a small, imaginary spill from the floor. The caption read, "POV, you have to supervise their every move, because some people just don't understand the concept of quality standards." The video, set to a jaunty, condescending tune, garnered over 50,000 views in the first 2 hours. Diana watched it, from the corner of the kitchen, on her own small, cracked phone, and mentally added another piece to the growing, and increasingly damning, puzzle she was assembling. Every single post, every mean-spirited comment, every public and private act of humiliation was being meticulously and systematically catalogued. "Did you see my new video?" Victoria asked later that day, her voice a casual, conversational purr as Diana served her lunch. "My followers absolutely loved it. A few of them even asked if you were available to work for them, too." She let out a loud, braying laugh. "Of course, I told them you were still on probation." What Victoria, in her blissful, self-absorbed ignorance, did not know was that Diana had spent the last 3 nights, during the long, silent hours when the rest of the household was asleep, doing far more than just cleaning the mansion. She had been using the computer in William's office to conduct a deep and exhaustive dive into the Richards family, their various corporate entities, and most importantly, William's extensive and very public charitable donations. And she had discovered something fascinating. William Richards did not just donate to the Children's Heart Foundation, he was a member of its board of directors, and he had, just recently, significantly increased his personal contribution, with the specific, and legally binding, stipulation that the funds be used to cover the costs of pediatric heart surgeries for children from low-income families. On Wednesday, Diana had her first, and most significant, stroke of luck. While she was organizing the books in William's office, she overheard a phone conversation, a conversation that would completely and irrevocably alter the course of her strategy. "Dr. Martinez, I understand completely," William was saying, his voice a low, serious rumble as he paced the room, completely oblivious to Diana's silent, unobtrusive presence. "The Foundation needs more documented cases to show the real, tangible impact of our donations. Personal stories, you know, they always seem to have a greater impact on our other donors." Diana froze, her hand hovering over a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare. Dr. Martinez and Dr. Carlos Martinez, the pediatric cardiac surgeon who had performed Emma's first operation. Of course, William continued. "If you have any current cases, families who are struggling to pay for these procedures, it would be perfect for our annual fundraising presentation next week, especially if they have a particularly inspiring story of overcoming adversity." When William hung up the phone, Diana was finishing with the last shelf of books, but her mind was racing. A plan, audacious and brilliant and terrifyingly simple, was beginning to take shape. That night, Diana did something she hadn't done in months. She called her former boss at the hospital, Dr. Sarah Chen, the woman with whom she had worked side by side for over a decade before the crushing weight of her medical bills had forced her to seek out higher paying and far more demeaning work. Diana, what a wonderful surprise. How are you? And how is our sweet Emma? Sarah's warm, kind voice brought a lump to Diana's throat. We're surviving, Sarah, we're surviving. Actually, I'm calling because I need a favor, a very specific favor. Diana, carefully and cautiously, explained her situation. She omitted the most humiliating details of her current employment, but she emphasized the fact that she was working for a family with a deep and very personal connection to the Children's Heart Foundation. Interesting, Sarah said, her voice thoughtful. You know, we have several cases here at the hospital, cases that are remarkably similar to Emma's, desperate families, children in desperate need of expensive, life-saving surgeries, and coincidentally, Dr. Martinez was just mentioning to me the other day that the foundation is actively looking for new cases to feature in their upcoming presentation. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about, Diana said, her heart beginning to pound with a new and unfamiliar sense of hope. Over the next few days, Diana began to implement the first, delicate phase of her plan. During her daily chores, she began to subtly and strategically leak small, carefully chosen details about her own situation, always within earshot of William, never directly, always as a series of casual, seemingly unintentional comments. A hushed, worried phone conversation with Sarah about Emma's upcoming doctor's appointment. A quiet, tearful call with Emma, in which she spoke of the financial strain of her ongoing medical care. Yes, doctor, she's recovering well from the last procedure, she would say, her voice a low, anxious murmur, knowing that William was sitting at the breakfast table, just a few feet away. The problem is the specialized aftercare. The insurance only covers 60% of the cost. No, I can't possibly miss a day of work right now. I absolutely have to keep this job. And William, as she had hoped, as she had calculated, began to pay attention. She could feel his curious, sympathetic glances. She saw him pause in his activities, his head cocked. Whenever she spoke of Emma, he was a ruthless, successful businessman, but he was also a father who had lost his first wife in childbirth, and the daughter who had not survived. The pain of that loss, she knew, was always there, a quiet, aching void, hidden just beneath the surface of his cool, professional composure. But, meanwhile, Victoria, oblivious to the subtle, intricate dance being played out under her own roof, intensified her attacks. She discovered, through the household security cameras, that Diana had been using the office computer during the night, and she exploded. Thought I wouldn't find out, she shrieked, her voice a high, piercing sound of pure, unadulterated rage. She waved a finger in Diana's face. Using our private property without permission, that is a clear and flagrant breach of your employment contract. It is grounds for immediate dismissal. Diana remained calm. I apologize, ma'am. I simply needed to check on some information related to my daughter's ongoing medical treatment. I did not access any of your personal files. I don't care. You have no right to touch anything that is not directly related to your cleaning duties. Victoria was losing control, her face a mask of crimson fury. And since you seem to enjoy using the computer so much, how about this? You can spend the rest of the week manually scanning every single file in my husband's office. You have until Friday. It was an impossible, punitive task. Hundreds of documents, thousands of pages, that would take weeks to properly scan, but Diana simply nodded, her expression a mask of calm, professional deference. Of course, ma'am, I will begin immediately. What Victoria, in her blind, arrogant rage, could not possibly have realized was that she had just, with her own words, with her own actions, handed Diana the keys to the kingdom. She had just given her complete, unrestricted access to every one of William's personal and professional files, every piece of correspondence with his charitable organizations, every donation record, and most importantly, his entire, and very extensive, contact list of other philanthropists, board members, and influential figures in the city's philanthropic community. That night, as she sat in the silent, darkened office, ostensibly digitizing files, Diana discovered something that made her blood run cold. Victoria had been systematically and secretly sabotaging her husband's charitable efforts. She had intercepted and blocked at least 3 separate attempts by William to increase the family's donations to the Children's Heart Foundation. There were emails, written from her own account, in which she argued that too much charity only creates a culture of dependency, and that the money would be better invested in more strategic causes, such as the long-overdue renovation of their beach house in the Hamptons. But there was more. Something even more shocking. Victoria had used their joint charitable account to make a $50,000 donation to an organization that was, in fact, a luxury spa, a wellness retreat, where she and her friends went for a week of pampering every single month. Diana photographed everything, every email, every bank transfer, every single fraudulent receipt, and then she found the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. The annual fundraising presentation for the Children's Heart Foundation was scheduled for the following Monday, and William was slated to give the keynote address. A speech about how the personal, inspiring stories of the families they helped were the very lifeblood of their organization. Sitting alone in the silent office at 2 a.m, surrounded by a mountain of irrefutable evidence of Victoria's hypocrisy, a slow, cold smile spread across Diana's face. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a general, on the eve of a great and decisive battle, who has just discovered that her enemy, in her arrogance, in her carelessness, has left her entire flank exposed. Victoria thought she was punishing Diana. In reality, she had just handed her maid all the tools she would ever need for her own spectacular and very public destruction. Monday arrived, a perfect, crisp autumn morning. Victoria woke with a sense of excited anticipation, posting a selfie to her Instagram account with the caption, "Ready to support my amazing husband at his big charity presentation today. #PowerCouple, #philanthropy, #blessed." The post garnered over 53,000 likes in the first hour. Diana served her coffee at the perfect 72-degree temperature, as always, but this time, when Victoria picked up her phone to check her notifications, she found something unexpected. A direct message from an account she didn't recognize. An account called The Truth About Charity. Mrs. Richards, you may want to check your email before you leave for today's presentation. I believe some interesting information has come to light regarding your own personal philanthropic activities. Information that may be of some relevance. Victoria frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing her perfectly made-up face. Probably just another one of the pathetic, jealous haters who trolled her account. But a seed of curiosity, of unease, had been planted. She opened her email, and her world, her perfect, carefully constructed, and utterly fraudulent world, came crashing down around her. There it was. A complete and utterly damning folder of evidence. Screenshots of her fraudulent transactions, the emails in which she had diverted charitable donations to her own personal spa retreats, the bank records showing the $50,000 donation to the wellness center, and worse, much worse, a series of private and deeply unflattering messages in which she had mocked the pathetic, grasping families that her husband was so determined to help. "William," she shrieked, running to his office, her phone clutched in her trembling hand. Someone has hacked our accounts." But William wasn't there. He had already left for the foundation's preparatory meeting, and Diana was in the dining room, calmly, serenely, polishing the silver, as if nothing at all was amiss. "You," Victoria whispered, her voice a low, menacing hiss as she pointed a trembling finger at Diana. "You did this." Diana looked up, her expression one of polite and very convincing confusion. "Did what, ma'am?" Victoria shoved the phone in her face. These lies, these false accusations." Diana examined the screen, her brow furrowed in a look of careful consideration. "I don't understand, ma'am. These appear to be your own emails, your own financial transactions. How can they be false when they all bear your own digital signature?" And then Victoria understood the full soul-crushing horror of the situation. They weren't fakes, they were real. Every single screenshot, every document, every single damning piece of evidence had been meticulously and patiently collected from her own files. During those long silent nights when she had forced Diana to digitize the office archives as a punishment, her phone began to ring, a shrill, insistent sound. The first call was from a journalist from a local celebrity blog. The second and third were from reporters from more legitimate news outlets. Apparently, the same folder of evidence had been sent, simultaneously, to 6 different media organizations. "Mrs. Richards, we're calling for a comment on the allegations of charity fraud that have just been released." She hung up, her hand shaking, but the phone immediately began to ring again. And then came the worst call of all. "Victoria, It was William. His voice was cold, flat, and utterly devoid of the warmth and affection she had come to take for granted. You need to come down to the foundation, right now. The board has just received some troubling information. William, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Someone is trying to sabotage me. Victoria. His voice cut through her hysterical denials like a shard of ice. Dr. Martinez has just shown me a series of emails. Emails from you. Emails in which you refer to the families we help as social parasites, and a drain on the resources of productive people. You wrote those words, Victoria, from your own email address. A dead, cold silence on the other end of the line, and there's more. It seems that one of the families we have been helping, one of their daughters, has been working in our home for the past 3 weeks. Victoria felt the world tilt on its axis. Wait, you're saying that Diana Santos, and mother of 9-year-old Emma Santos, the recipient of a grant from our foundation to cover the costs of her pediatric heart surgery, the same Emma Santos that you referred to in an email to one of your friends as another lost cause, draining resources from people who actually matter. Victoria looked at Diana, who was now calmly folding the linen napkins for that evening's dinner party. Their eyes met, and for the first time in 3 long weeks, Diana smiled. It was not a smile of malice. It was not a smile of revenge. It was a slow, sad, and almost maternal smile. The presentation has been cancelled, Victoria. William said, his voice a low, dead thing. And you are no longer welcome at this foundation. In fact, the board is considering legal action. She hung up the phone and turned on Diana, her body trembling with a rage that was now impotent, useless. You destroyed me. You planned this. From the very first day. Diana stopped folding the napkins and looked at her, her expression one of quiet and very real sadness. No, ma'am. I came here to work, to do my job, to take care of my daughter. You destroyed yourself. I just documented it. You are a snake, a parasite. You infiltrated my home. You know what the irony is, Mrs. Richards, Diana said, her voice still infuriatingly calm. If you had simply, for one single day, treated me with a shred of basic human decency, none of this would have ever happened. I would have worked quietly. I would have earned my salary, and you would never have known who I was. Victoria tried to form a reply, to summon some last, desperate defense, but the words wouldn't come, because she knew, in the deepest, darkest corner of her soul, that Diana was right. The phone rang again. A television reporter, this time, asking if she would be willing to give an on-camera interview about the allegations of philanthropic misconduct. In the background, she could hear the other house phones beginning to ring, a chorus of condemnation from her assistants, her socialite friends, her entire crumbling world. Diana picked up her purse and walked towards the door. Oh, and one more thing, she said, pausing in the doorway. Dr. Martinez was so impressed with the dedication and resilience of the families you so despise, that he has decided to create a special, new program, a program specifically designed to help the children of domestic workers. Emma will be its first beneficiary. She'll be receiving free, monthly consultations for the next 5 years. Victoria collapsed into a chair, watching as Diana walked out the same door through which 9 other maids had fled in tears, but this time, she was the one who was crying. As Diana walked through the perfectly manicured gardens, she could hear the incessant, frantic ringing of the phones from inside the house. Each ring was another crack in the perfect, and perfectly false, facade of Victoria Richards's life. And the most beautiful, the most poetic, the most exquisitely just thing of all, was that Victoria had personally, and enthusiastically, provided every single one of the tools for her own spectacular, and very public, downfall. 6 months later, Diana Santos sat in her own spacious, light-filled office at the headquarters of the Children's Heart Foundation. She was no longer a beneficiary. She was the new Family Relations Coordinator, a position that had been created especially for her. After her story had gone viral and inspired a complete, and long overdue, overhaul of the organization's entire approach to family assistance, Emma, now fully recovered and thriving, was attending a prestigious private school. On a full scholarship sponsored by the foundation, her latest heart scans had shown a recovery so remarkable, the doctors had called it a miracle. But Diana knew, it was not a miracle, it was the result of a mother's fierce and unwavering refusal to give up. Mrs. Santos, Dr. Martinez said, entering her office with a warm, genuine smile, "We've just received 15 new applications for the program you developed, all of them from the families of domestic workers, seeking medical assistance for their children." Diana nodded. a quiet, professional satisfaction on her face. She gave each case her personal and undivided attention, because she knew, in her bones, what it was like to be on the other side of that desk, desperate, humiliated, but never, ever without hope. Victoria Richards, on the other hand, was living in a different reality. The charity fraud scandal had not only destroyed her reputation, it had triggered a full-scale IRS investigation, which had uncovered years of systematic tax evasion. William had filed for divorce 2 weeks after the story broke, having discovered that Victoria had not only sabotaged his charitable donations, but had also secretly interfered in a number of his most important business decisions, costing the company millions in lost opportunities. She's living in a small rented apartment in Queens now, Dr. Chen had reported. During a recent lunch with Diana, my cousin lives in the same building. She says Victoria doesn't even leave the house anymore. All of her old high society friends, they've completely abandoned her. Diana had just nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor pity. She had learned that true justice does not require celebration. It simply is a natural rebalancing force in the universe. The most significant moment, however, had come on a Thursday afternoon when William Richards had shown up, unannounced, at the Foundation's office. Diana had greeted him with a cool, professional courtesy, all traces of the fear and submission that had once defined their relationship gone. "Diana," he had said, looking older and more tired than she had ever seen him. "I came here to apologize, not just for what Victoria did, but for my own cowardice, for allowing it to happen in my home. I knew something was wrong, but I chose to ignore it." She had studied his face for a long, silent moment. "Mr. Richards, sometimes a person has to lose everything before they can discover who they really are. I believe you are a fundamentally decent man who simply lost his way. The difference is, you still have the chance to choose a different path." He had nodded, a slow, grateful gesture. He had handed her an envelope. "This is a personal donation to the new program you've created, not from the company, from me." He had paused. "And there's something else." Inside the envelope had been a check for $200,000 and a legal document, the deed to a small, charming house in Westchester. "It has 3 bedrooms, he had explained, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. "A yard, and it's in one of the best school districts in the state. I thought Emma deserved to grow up in a place where she could have friends, a normal life." Tears had welled in her eyes, but her voice had remained steady. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you taught me something, Diana. You taught me that a person's dignity cannot be bought or sold. It can only be recognized." He had paused again, his gaze distant, sorrowful. "And because my first daughter, the one who did not survive, would have been Emma's age now, and perhaps this is my way of honoring her memory." That night, as she tucked Emma into bed, in the small but cozy room of their current apartment, she knew that soon they would be in a home of their own, a home they had not received as a gift of charity, but as a reward for their own strength, their own integrity. "Mommy," Emma had said, her voice sleepy, "my teacher told me that you're famous now. Is that true?" Diana had smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. "I'm not famous, sweetheart. I just reminded a few people of something they already knew, deep down in their hearts. What's that every single human being on this earth deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of where they work, or how much money they have, and that sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who chooses to be kind, even when the rest of the world is being cruel, like you did," Emma had whispered, her eyes already closing, "with the mean lady. Exactly like I did, my love. You don't fight cruelty with more cruelty, you fight it by showing the world that there is a better and a stronger way to live." As Emma slept, Diana had sat on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out at the glittering, indifferent lights of the city. In just a few short, tumultuous months, she had gone from a humiliated maid to a respected professional, from a desperate mother to a powerful advocate for other families in need. But the greatest victory, she knew, was not the professional or the financial. It was the simple and profound act of proving, to herself and to her daughter, that a person's dignity is not something that others can take away from you. It is something you carry within you, a small and unextinguishable flame, regardless of where you are or how hard others may try to make you feel. Victoria Richards had tried to break her spirit. Instead, she had only succeeded in forging it into something stronger and more beautiful than she could ever have imagined.